Okay, welcome back to the Bruderhof YouTube channel. It's been a while since we've posted here. Today I'm joined by Timothy, a fellow Bruderhof member, and we plan to post videos from time to time where we discuss or think about our faith and practice here at the Bruderhof community because while we are Christian, we believe in Jesus, sometimes people do have questions about the way we have been called to live.
Yeah, and the point is, questions are okay, and we don't mind, and it's good to talk about things, and especially the things that might not make sense or seem a little odd or strange to the outsider. Yeah, we can talk about it, and that's what this is. That's what this is all about.
So if you do have questions that you've wanted to ask, not so much practical questions, but more questions about why we believe what we believe and why we live the way we do, feel free to drop them in the comments. Today, though, we're going to be talking about the question of vows. And as you may or may not know, all members of the Bruderhof take lifetime vows of membership when we join. These are vows that you can only take when you're 21,
Right.
when you've achieved the maturity to be able to make such a decision. And those vows are binding, and they cannot really, one can't really be released by them. Of course,
Right.
people can leave the Bruderhof after they become members. No one's holding them here.
But we don't have the power to release people from vows.
So the question we're going to talk about today is, are vows biblical? Where in the Bible does Jesus say we should make binding vows to a group of people or a church? And this has, I think, broader implications than just our particular community,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, I guess what we should start with asking is does the Bruderhof even make this kind of claim about anything we do? Is anything we do biblical? And the thing is, we kind of do. So we say, for instance, that we share all of our possessions because that's what Jesus asked us to do. There's passages like Luke 14 where he says, no one who has not given up everything he has can be my disciple. So the things that are kind of at the core of our life, we do say these are biblical. So I think it's a totally fair question. Is it biblical to make a vow to a body of believers? And I guess the next question to ask is, are vows biblical at all? Yeah, well, we can talk about that. Should we talk about that?
Let's dive into that.
Sure, yeah. So for starters, the whole thing with vows is you see it going all the way back to the book of Genesis. And the vow that anyone can make usually involves kind of a give and take between you and God. You promise to do something or to observe something, sometimes for your whole life, sometimes for a set period of time. And in return, you ask God to do something. So there's this, there's a give and take. It's never just like a static thing. And that kind of idea goes all the way back to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then you see it going all the way through the Old Testament, and then into the New Testament, you see Paul making vows. There's an interesting phenomenon that I'm sure those of you who've done some reading in the Old Testament know about is the Nazarite. There's people like Samson, who was a Nazarite, right? He, for his whole life, didn't drink alcohol and he didn't cut his hair. That's a kind of vow. The more common kind is where you have a specific request from God a specific request to God, and if you want this thing to happen, you promise God, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and in exchange, you're going to do this, this, and this. So that whole phenomenon of vows is there throughout the Bible. And the one thing that becomes really clear is you never, ever break your vow. One of the remarkable stories kind of a bit sad in a way is Jephthah, because he makes this vow that he's going to offer to God the first living thing that he sees when he comes back from battle, if he's victorious. There you have the formula, right? He says, if I win, if God lets me win, then I'm going to give to God the first living thing that I see. And it turns out that it's his daughter, and he offers her as a sacrifice, which is pretty horrible. But the whole thing behind that is he couldn't break his vow. And that's an extreme example, but you see it throughout the whole Bible. So that's the big idea of vows. But that doesn't really help us, because there's nothing in there about like making a vow to a body of believers. So,
just to jump in here, I don't
sure.
think our vows are actually that remarkable.
No, they're not.
I mean, our vows are vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity, which are basically the same vows that religious orders have been taking since
For 2,000 years, yeah.
For 2,000 years, so.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think we're on solid ground in terms of, like many other religious orders or religious groups, we make vows to each other. But the question is there a biblical basis for it? And we kind of have to take the approach of, so this life that we live, it involves a lot of trust, right? We share all of our money, all of our possessions. We count on each other. You can't enter into this kind of level of community without some kind of expectation that your brothers and sisters aren't just going to walk out on you, because you're giving up everything. You're giving up a career. You're giving up healthcare. All the things that you would have to worry about if you were not living on the community. You entrust all of that to the community, and in return, you assume that you're going to be taken care of. And if there isn't any basis for assuming that, that's a problem. And I personally think that there's nothing, one great way to ensure that we can make this assumption that our brothers and sisters aren't going to walk out on us is the biblical vow. It's this thing that goes back for more than 3,000 years, and it provides a level of security. We promise to each other that we're not going to forsake each other, we're not going to walk out on each other. It's a lifetime commitment. It's kind of interesting, we in the Bruderhof put our commitment to each other in the brotherhood above our marriage vows even. That's one of the questions that...
And the reason for that is and it's actually stated in the marriage vows, that a marriage is built on sand unless it's built on the rock of faith. And our vow to each other is a vow to one another, of course, but it's also a vow to God, right? It's actually tied very closely with the baptismal covenant.
Right.
So that's why it actually stands higher.
Right. Oh, yeah. So I was wondering, when you made the vow, and quite a number of years before I did. When you made the vow, what was it that made you think that this was the right thing to do?
Well, it was kind of an inescapable conclusion drawn from reading the Gospels. For me, now for some people that might seem like a leap, but having grown up, I grew up in the Bruderhof, and you read passages like you mentioned, Luke 14. You read about the sacrificial nature of discipleship, and you realize it does call for, Jesus says, if you want to lose your life, if you want to gain your life, you have to lose your life. And many of these things speak to this in a way, it's a paradox, right? The Sermon on the Mount is full of this, you're going to gain brothers, sisters, family members if you let go of them. So. And that's really what baptism is a letting go. So for me, it was just like a pretty clear call. This is what, if I'm going to call myself a Christian, this is what it's going to mean. It's going to mean renouncing wealth and financial security in order to experience these blessings in community.
Right. And it's interesting how what you just said, and I would say it was very similar for me, follows the biblical formula for a vow. you do something, you give something up, or you do some action, and in return, something is done for you. In the same way that when Jacob made a vow and asked God to do something for him, when we make vows to give everything up, in return, everything is given back to us. Just through the function of the brotherhood life here, the vowed commitment to each other. So that, I think it's kind of cool that it follows the same formula that goes all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament.
It's very cool. Now, one question I just want to throw in there, because it's probably on some people's minds. You often see, particularly in Christian discourse, people talking about moving from church to church, saying, God led us here, or we're in this different season where God is leading us. And there's this, I think, a valid question about the leading of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. Right. And would the leading of the Holy Spirit actually ever come in conflict with a vow?
That's a good question. Think about that one. The first thing that comes to mind is the example of Paul the Apostle in the book of Acts. And there's somebody who, throughout all of his missionary journeys and his career as a traveling evangelist, he very much followed the leading of the Spirit. There's that remarkable scene in Acts 17 or 16 where he wanted to go to Asia Minor or wherever it was, and he met a man in a dream who said, "Come to Macedonia and help us." So he completely switched. He switched from one plan to another, ended up going to Greece and founding churches in Philippi, in Thessaloniki, and in Corinth. So he was very open to the leading of the Spirit. But then when it came to observances, specifically vows, and even there's those scenes in Acts where it seems like he did the vow just to make a good impression on people. He still did it. Or having some of his co-workers be circumcised just so that people would have a good impression of him. So there's that balance between freely following the Spirit and also keeping observances, religious observances. That doesn't really speak to your question because he's not switching churches or whatever. But yeah.
Well, I'm going to answer the question myself.
Yeah. Do.
I find the simplicity of Jesus' words always what to come back to, and where Jesus says, "Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Anything else comes from the devil."
Right.
And a vow is a yes.
Yep.
And we're expected to stand to our yeses.
Right. But that brings up a really interesting point. So we have this whole thing throughout the Bible of making vows, right? And it's a big thing. You're doing it in the sight of God, right? Like I was saying. But then Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, "Do not swear by heaven or earth or Jerusalem or the hairs on your head." Right. So what does he mean by that? And there, I think what's going on there is he's calling us to the kind of life where we take telling the truth so seriously that vows are no longer necessary. Because the whole point of vows is you want everyone to know, including God, that you really mean what you say. But I think what Jesus is calling us to is living in such a way where these big ceremonies about really, really meaning what you say are unnecessary, I guess.
But to be clear, you're not equating taking a vow with swearing an oath.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's not talking about cursing, right?
No. But you're saying I will do something by this. Like our vows are much simpler.
Yeah.
It's will you do this? And you say yes.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
So
it's true. It's true.
But I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like we really should live in such a state of truthfulness that we don't need ceremonies for anything.
But that being said, when someone like me or you or anyone makes a commitment to the Bruderhof on their knees in front of witnesses in the sight of God, that's binding. That's binding. And it's difficult to say. I mean, there's no command of Jesus that says you have to make vows to a body of believers, but there is, as I said, biblical vows, the importance of staying true to the people who you live in community with. We take it seriously. Yeah.
So this is basically just scratching the surface on this one, and hopefully there's follow-up questions or objections, or you want to have an argument with us. We will push back, and we'll be glad to discuss it in the comments next week or whenever we get in front of the camera again.
Yeah.
So thanks, TJ. It's been a blast, and see you next time.
See you around.